Hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion today on shaping the future, engineers' role in addressing climate change. My name is Kim Bouffard, and I'm with Engineers Canada. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our first speaker, Senator Rosa Galvez. Originally from Peru, she is one of Canada's leading experts in pollution control and its effects on human health. She has a PhD in environmental engineering from McGill University and has been a professor at Université Laval at Quebec since 1994, heading the Civil and Water Engineering Department from 2010 to 2016. She specializes in water and soil decontamination, waste management and residue, and environmental impact and risk assessment. Throughout her career, she has been requested by government, private companies, and community organizations to offer expert advice. Senator Galvez is a member of the Ordre des Ingénieurs du Québec, the Canadian Society for Civil Engineering, and Engineers Without Borders. Her research has led her around the world to countries such as France, Italy, Belgium, Japan, and China. Senator Galvez was appointed to the Senate on December 6, 2016, representing Quebec Bedford. She lives in Quebec with her partner, Luc, and has 3 children, Virginie, Lydia, and Francisco. Please join me in welcoming the Honorable Rosa Galvez.
Thank you so much, Kim. Welcome to this panel in honor of World Engineering Day. I thank Engineers Canada for inviting me to give the opening remarks to what will surely be an interesting and vital discussion with positive effects to our profession. For me, it's always enjoyable to step away from the Senate and return amongst my engineering colleagues. The main theme of this year's World Engineering Day Sustainable Development is Building Back Better, where this panel's discussion will answer to the question, what is the engineering roles in addressing climate change? As you know, the entire planet is currently facing 2 historical concomitant crises: the health crisis caused by COVID-19 and the climate crisis caused by the human activity when using fossil fuels for electrification, transport, or industrial activities, all well known to the engineering profession. These 2 crises we are discovering that have some common roots, have caused significant damage to society, and continue to impose important risks to our health, our safety, and global well-being. Climate change is increasing physical, economical, and social global risk every day. The World Economic Forum points that climate action failure is the top global risk today and will remain for decades to come. Earlier this week, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released yet another dire report sounding the alarm. Approximately 3.3 to 3.6 billion people live in contexts that are highly vulnerable to climate change. And current unsustainable development patterns are increasing exposure of ecosystems and people to climate hazards. In Canada, every single province and territory has been hit by extreme weather events causing unprecedented losses for Canadians. In 2020 alone, these catastrophic events cost $2.4 billion in insured damage. Basic infrastructure is destroyed or weakened with each of these events. We just need to see the consequence of the last flood in British Columbia. Engineers' brain and ingenuity are urgently needed to rebuild and construct future, more resilient infrastructure, but also to protect actively and promote sustainable development and transformation towards a low-carbon, circular knowledge economy. Extreme weather and rapid alterations to Canada's climate are a risk to both public safety and the dependability of our infrastructure. Most of today's infrastructure is not adapted nor resistant to this increasingly destructive climate event. With an already massive infrastructure deficit that is estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars, Canada cannot afford to add further risk and loss of infrastructure if we are to maintain our current quality of basic services. In concluding, To address this risk, engineers have an important and frontline role to play, whether through the development of new, cleaner, and more efficient technologies, or the deployment or infrastructure resilient to the new climate reality. We engineers, we can reduce physical risk, restore greater well-being, and improve the quality of life for ours and future generations. Engineering is a cornerstone of resilient, healthy, and safe societies, and it also must increase its role in the protection of ecosystem and the ecological services it provides, such as clean water, clean soil, and clean air. I look very much forward to listening with a lot of attention to your discussion. So thank you very much for this invitation.
Thank you very much, Senator Galvez, for those welcoming remarks and for helping to kick off this discussion. I would like to introduce you now to Jeanette Southwood. Jeanette is our moderator and will be guiding us through this very timely conversation. Not only is Jeanette an award-winning engineer and leader, she is Vice President of Corporate Affairs and Strategic Partnerships at Engineers Canada. Before joining Engineers Canada, she led the Canadian urban development and infrastructure sector and the Global Sustainable Cities teams at an international consulting firm, where she is the first Black woman to be appointed to the senior leadership position of principal globally. Jeanette has received an honorary doctorate and was honored as one of Canada's Clean 50 for her work and dedication to sustainable development, leading change, champion innovation, and changing our world for the better. She was also indicted as a fellow to the Canadian Academy of Engineering and was twice named one of WXN Canada's top 100 most powerful women and was recognized as one of the women of innovation. Jeanette has been a contributor to the Bank of Knowledge that details research and practice and to the communities of practice around urbanization, urban resilience, and sustainable development, and is a member of the TD Insurance Advisory Board on climate change. Jeanette, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Kim, and thank you, Senator Galvez, for your welcoming remarks. We greatly appreciate you joining us here today. Happy World Engineering Day, everyone, and welcome to our panel session on Shaping the Future, Engineers' Role in Addressing Climate Change. I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded lands of the Omama-Wini-Wini-Wag, Anishinaabe, the original peoples of this land. As we gather on a national virtual platform, I would like to acknowledge the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territory of the all Métis and First Nations people that call this land home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between peoples, and I invite you to take time to open your minds and hearts to the stories and histories of local Indigenous peoples in a meaningful way. Engineers Canada is the national organization of the 12 provincial and territorial engineering regulators that license Canada's more than 300,000 members of the engineering profession. I'm joined today by Harshan Radhakrishnan, PEng of Engineers and Geoscientists British Columbia, John Gamble, PEng of Association of Consulting Engineering Companies of Canada, Shan Lee McEwen, EIT of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, Boris Martin of the Engineers Without Borders Canada organization, and Louise Millette, ING of Polytechnique Montréal. After we hear from our panelists, we'll have some time for questions from the audience. If you have a question for a specific panelist or for all of the panelists, please enter it into the Q&A section of the webinar, which will be monitored by my Engineers Canada colleague, Kim Buffard, who is also our Manager of Outreach and Engagement. One of Engineers Canada's core purposes is to foster recognition of the value and contribution of the profession to society and to spark interest in the next generation of professionals. And today we'll be discussing the value and contribution that the engineering profession brings to addressing the challenges of climate change on society. It is widely believed that the threat posed by catastrophic climate change will eclipse everything we've faced to date, and that our collective response will be the defining task of our era. I would now like to invite each panelist to introduce yourself, your role, your organization's role in the engineering community, and society in general. And let's start with Harshan, who is the Manager of Climate Change and Sustainability Initiatives at Engineers and Geoscientists British Columbia. Over to you, Harshan.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. Hello, everyone, and thanks for having me on this panel. Before I begin, I'd like to start by noting that I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations, on whose territories I live, work, and play. As some of you may be aware, Engineers and Geoscientists BC is the provincial regulatory body for engineering and geoscience professions in BC, with over 40,000 registrants working in diverse practice areas. And Engineers and Geoscientists' mandate, as outlined in the Professional Governance Act, is to protect the public interest, respecting the practice of professional engineering and professional geoscience. And we have the responsibility to deliver on that mandate by establishing, monitoring, and enforcing standards for the practice of professional engineers and professional geoscience, and to establish requirements for entry into practice. A little bit about me. I have about 16 plus years of experience in the engineering world. Worked in industry, government, and of late in the regulatory body. My current role is Manager of Climate Change and Sustainability Initiatives at Engineers and Geoscientists BC. My role is to provide support and provide strategies for engineers and geoscientists for them to consider climate change and sustainability strategies within their work. There's also a soft aspect to the work that I do. That is in terms of supporting not-for-profit organizations, equity-seeking groups, federal, local, provincial governments, industry, utilities, by helping them with their climate change and sustainability initiatives. So it's a thrilling role, and I'm so glad that I've been able to assume this role. And I've been doing this from June 2019. In terms of the core work that I do, I have the privilege to support Engineers and Geoscientists BC's Climate Change Advisory Group and Sustainability Advisory Group. And I'm also the staff lead responsible for implementing Engineers and Geoscientists BC's unanimously council-approved climate change action plan. I can get into that a little bit in detail when I have the chance and I have the floor, but I would like to turn it over back to Janet so that she gives others a chance. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Harshan. I'd like to ask Louise Millette, who's the Associate Professor in the Department of Civil, Geological, and Mining Engineering at Polytechnique Montréal, and also head of Polytechnique Montréal's Sustainable Development Office, to introduce herself. Over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Janet. And thanks to Engineers Canada for having me on this panel. Yes, I am indeed a professor, a university professor, but not your typical one. After finishing my PhD, I worked for 12 years in industry. And then, after much soul searching, I decided to take a big leap and accept a position as director of the Department of Civil, Geological, and Mining Engineering at Polytechnique Montréal. It turned out to be the best job in the world, and it kept me very busy for the last 20 years. I've finished that mandate last June, but I'm still head of the Sustainable Development Office. Polytechnique is a technical university and one of Canada's leading engineering and research facility in Canada. Over the years, it has trained nearly 55,000 engineers, professionals, and researchers, and is currently home of 10,000 students, 300 professors, and 1,600 employees. Next year, we'll be celebrating our 150th birthday. My career change was motivated in part by the opportunity to work into including more sustainability into the training of engineers. I believed then, and I still do, that we can change the world one engineer at a time. Education is not a bad place to start. I'm happy to see that much has changed over the past 20 years, but that certainly will not be enough to cope with the challenges of climate change, but more on that later. Back to you, Janet.
Merci, Louise. I'd next like to invite Shanley McEwen, who's the president of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, to introduce herself. Over to you, Shanley.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanette. Hello, everyone. My name is Shanley McEwen. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm talking to you guys today from Treaty 6 territory, home of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Lakota, Dakota, and the Métis Nation here in Saskatchewan. So currently I am a student at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm studying environmental engineering, professional communications, and ethics and justice. So a wide range there for sure. So outside of my work with the CFES, I've also had the incredible opportunity to work with ACTUA, which is the largest STEM outreach organization in Canada. Specifically, while I worked there, I worked on initiatives for women in engineering and robotics, and with Northern Indigenous communities in Saskatchewan. So as Jeanette already said, I'm the president of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, and before this academic year, I spent the previous 2 years as the ambassador for Western Canada to the CFES, and now obviously have this incredible opportunity to help lead this organization and the incredible team of students that we have there. So the CFES is a bilingual national student organization. We unite 54 engineering student societies at 44 higher education institutions across the country and provide the unified voice of the 85,000 engineering students in undergraduate engineering students in Canada. So within the engineering community, the CFES is an advocate for students, whether it's working with Engineers Canada or the Canadian Engineering Accreditation Board or Engineering Deans Canada. Our purpose really is to make the students' experience better, and to help students advocate for the things that they need to, be successful in the future and be successful in taking on climate change. Recently, one of the things that the CFES has done is supported the Canadian Engineering Grand Challenges document with the Engineering Deans Canada, which basically outlined the 6 challenges engineers face in the fight against climate change, and as a response to the United Nations 16 Sustainable Development Goals. So the CFES is really, it's a services body, it's an advocacy body, and within our communities, what we try to do is explain a bit of what engineers can do and what we want to do in the future to shape this profession. I'm really honored to be here to represent the future of the profession alongside all of these incredible panelists, these professionals, these mentors, and I'm looking forward to answering all your guys' questions and taking some time today to speak about the opportunities we all have to take care of the planet together.
Thank you so much, Shanley. Now I would like to introduce Boris Martin, CEO of Engineers Without Borders Canada. Over to you, Boris.
Hi, folks. My name is Boris. I'm really glad to be on this panel with you today. I live in Toronto in the East End, Danforth, Greenwood area of the city. It's the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And Toronto is a big city now with a diverse set of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people living here. And I'm glad that we're all acknowledging kind of the ancestral, stewards of the land as we have a talk on climate change. I think it's important. I personally also feel quite affected by what's happening in the world today around Ukraine. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, like, I live in Toronto, it's a peaceful city, and some people in Ukraine right now are fearing for their safety and their lives. And I just wanted that to be in the space for some reason. So I'm the CEO of Engineers Without Borders Canada. We are a registered charity in this country. We're supported by thousands of professional engineers who've made EWB their charity of choice. And really what we do in Canada is mobilize engineering graduates and really anyone interested in technology and society to help them support communities who are most vulnerable and most affected by climate change. So every year we mobilize about 2,000 volunteers, mostly undergraduate engineering students. And so I hear from Shanli. That's about 2% of the total. So like, you know, they're 1 in 100 type volunteers. And then we mobilize time and talent and the donations we receive to support initiatives in Africa in a range of sectors, in sustainable agriculture, technology for education, technology for mental health, inclusive finance, just to name a few sectors. A point of pride is that our membership and our management and our board are gender balanced in a profession that still is working on being inclusive to women and providing more leadership opportunity for women. So that's an important piece of EWB's makeup. Over 20 years of supporting hundreds of innovative initiatives, I've seen quite a few things. Like I feel like most engineering graduates or students are dreamers. They have a big desire to make a change in the world, and they also believe that everything is possible. And I think that's a great mix for finding breakthrough solutions to climate change. I also think that young people in engineering are wanting to make a difference, but sometimes they find themselves stuck in knowing where to start. And really, what's the role of EWB? It's a platform for people to find ways to make a meaningful contribution. So that's kind of like how we function, is like helping sort of steward people's contribution, make sure that their actions matter, be it a donation or the time they volunteer for change. And I'm really glad to be here today.
Thank you very much, Boris. And finally, I would like to ask John Gamble, President and CEO of the Association of Consulting Engineering Companies Canada, to introduce himself. Over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Jeanette. And like Jeanette, I am coming to you from Ottawa, which is the unceded Algonquin First Nation. And it's a pleasure to be with you all. And of course, it's a little daunting to hear the credentials of the people that you've just heard from. The Association of Consulting Engineering Companies Canada is a business association whose members are companies that provide professional service, a broad range of professional services pertinent to the natural and built environment. We are a federation of 12 provincial and territorial associations. We collectively represent over 400 professional service companies that employ over 60,000 Canadians. That's, of course, professional engineers, but also environmental scientists, architects, land use planners, management consultants, and some of them are very boutique and very small and very specialized, and others are amongst the largest multidisciplinary global engineering companies in the world. And in fact, Canada is perennially one of the leaders in providing engineering services around the world, and it's something I don't think we give ourselves enough credit for. Our mission essentially is to advocate for a business and regulatory climate that recognizes and rewards our members for their contributions to society. And well, as an advocacy association, and we're absolutely unapologetic about advocating for our members, but we're always mindful that the whole raison d'etre for our services is to enhance the social, economic, and environmental quality of life for all Canadians, as well as around the world where those opportunities present. And it's something we take very seriously, but we also want to make sure that we have the capacity, both in the near term and the long term, to continue to not only provide those services in an effective and a demonstrable way, but we want to be able to reinvest in the profession, reinvest in our firms, and reinvest in the next generation so that we can continue to meet these challenges moving forward. And frankly, as we've all seen on so many fronts, the challenges facing us are not for the faint of heart anymore. I'm glad that we're having this discussion. It's a discussion that I think comes naturally to engineers because we naturally want to do a better job. We naturally want to be more effective and more efficient in the projects we deliver. And I think this is now coming into the consciousness, and I'm hoping this will be a renaissance that will really allow engineers to demonstrate what they can do and really leverage our knowledge and expertise to create a better world. So I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you, John. And thank you to all of our panelists for sharing about themselves and their organizations. Engineering is a regulated profession in Canada. Only individuals and firms licensed by a provincial or territorial regulator are permitted by law to undertake and assume responsibility for engineering projects in that province or territory. In British Columbia, this means that Engineers and Geoscientists British Columbia is charged with protecting the public interest by setting and maintaining high academic experience and professional practice standards for the over 40,000 licensed engineers in British Columbia. So of course, You heard me reference British Columbia. Our first question is for Harshan. And the question for Harshan is, in relation to climate change, what steps are you taking as a regulator to protect the public? And what are your expectations of licensed professionals in British Columbia?
Thank you so much for that. So I already mentioned Engineers and Geoscientists BC's mandate to protect the public interest respecting the practice of the professions. We primarily carry out our mandate by establishing, monitoring, and enforcing standards of professional practice. That's our core means, but we also have a lot more tools in the toolbox. And of course, as I alluded to, we do have a unanimously council-approved climate change action plan, which enables us to go farther and faster in terms of supporting our registrants. Let me back up a little bit. I'd like to, first of all, thank Engineers Canada for hosting this session. And I'd like to actually congratulate Engineers Canada for the leadership that they have demonstrated over the past number of years that has actually enabled the constituent associations to step up to the plate and follow the rhythm set by Engineers Canada. What I mean by that is Engineers Canada has invested in supporting transgenerational issues, for example, through their 30 by 30 initiative. Of course, Engineers and Geoscientists BC has adopted that. Efforts to engage with Indigenous people of Canada. Engineers Geoscientists BC has working groups, resources, and in fact, ongoing continuing education events that relate to reconciliation. And we have established professional practice guidelines on equity, diversity, and inclusion. And there again, Engineers Canada, through their work that they do, outlined that all constituent associations consider carrying out surveys, consider having strategies to promote equity, diversity, and inclusion. So we model the way because we have a good support system by way of Engineers Canada. So first off the bat, I'd like to note that. But coming to climate change, we see climate change as one of the defining issues of our time. We see that it will impact the way we live, work, and play. Essentially, it's going to be there for generations to come. But we see climate change as an opportunity, a challenge, and a responsibility for Engineers and Geoscientists BC and its registrants to deliver on. And we believe we can make a difference through our professional work, mainly by way of reducing emissions and increasing resilience. And essentially, over the past decade, Engineers and Geoscientists BC has undertaken many initiatives that has advanced how climate change is considered and addressed in engineering and geoscience practice. Some examples include establishing advisory groups, supporting communities of practice, publishing position statements on the role and responsibility of engineers and geoscientists with respect to climate change. We have carried out surveys, and furthermore, like I alluded to, since 2019, Engineers and Geoscientists BC has funded dedicated staff resources to support these initiatives, which means that there's ongoing budget, there's opportunity to hire students, opportunity to collaborate to maximize impact. Just last year, Engineers and Geoscientists BC released a climate change action plan. It sets out a methodical approach to addressing climate change related issues to the practice of engineering and geoscience, and specifically how we can support our registrants to proactively consider climate change within their professional practice. The plan was developed based on a 2-year consultation effort, and it outlines the actions under 4 broad areas that is sympathetic to the fact that we are a provincial regulatory body. the plan speaks to leadership, how we can lead by example, how we can collaborate with others to leverage resources and to enhance impact. How we can look at the registration process for professional engineers and professional geoscientists to make sure that the process incorporates climate change competencies. How we can provide ongoing continuing education to enable knowledge sharing on the challenges and opportunities that climate change brings to professional practice. And finally, how we can provide registrants with practical and relevant resources to inform and transform the way they practice. So I'll finish by giving you a few examples of what this means at a practical level, and I'll be happy to discuss any of these in more detail if there's interest. When we are establishing and updating our professional practice guidelines, we apply a climate lens to the process. So climate change adaptation as well as greenhouse gas reductions are factored in. We have created and continue to maintain a climate change information portal on our website, which is targeted at engineers and geoscientists, but this information is freely available to anyone who might find it valuable in their work. I'm thrilled to note that we have established 2 new areas of practice that our registrants can use to define their work, like climate science and climate risk management. Over 200 registrants have declared these as their areas of practice within the last 6 months, and we fully anticipate that these numbers will organically grow. And the outcome of this process is that Engineers and Geoscientists BC will work with registrants to identify what are the key competencies, what are the practice standards, and what ongoing training is relevant for these emerging practice areas. And it's not just climate science and climate risk management as well. We do understand that big data, machine learning, and things like artificial intelligence, they can be strategically leveraged to maximize the impact of the work done by engineers and geoscientists. So we are thoroughly invested in supporting looking at these new practice areas and how that enables registrants to define their work. We actively provide input to legislation and public policy to protect the public interest, respecting the practice of professions. In the building sector, for example, we have provided input and we continue to do so on the development and implementation of the BC Energy Step Code, which provides an optional pathway to build buildings all the way from base building code to net zero ready. Of course, we provide input to the province on their existing buildings renewal strategy. These are just some examples, but consultation, providing input to public policy is consistent, ongoing, and we see that as one of the effective means of eliciting a change through the work that our engineers can provide. And that will tie to the practice guidelines that we offer to our registrants. And finally, I talked about knowledge sharing through our networks and channels. A good example here is leveraging the work done by Engineers Geoscientists BC's divisions that work on issues related to climate change. There are several divisions, but I'll highlight a couple of them here. For those that do not know, divisions are forums for exchange of ideas in a particular field or area of interest. For example, the Environmental Professionals Division has about 2,200 registrants. And we have the Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Division, and that has nearly 4,000 members. There are also Engineers Geoscientists BC's branch activities. There's about 15 branches, advisory groups related to climate change and sustainability, a mentoring program, our annual conference has content that's related to everything that we talked about, broad range of issues that relate to social responsibility. We also offer all manner of communications, including our innovation magazine that can serve to highlight certain issues. We do have a climate change focused edition every year, and where necessary, I mean, if you take a look at the most recent issue of the magazine, there's a detailed coverage on the recent flooding in BC and the response by the engineering and geoscience community. So I'd encourage folks to kind of look at that. So I'll close here. In summary, you talked about, what is the Engineers Geoscientists BC's approach? I'd like to end by saying that our approach to climate action is to provide resources to engineers and geoscientists and to support innovative, progressive, and forward-looking professional practice. And we are doing this in collaboration with other agencies and with the government, and by providing practical, actionable resources to registrants. And as we implement Engineers and Geoscientists BC's Climate Change Action Plan over the coming years, we will continue to monitor and evaluate the evolving science, technology, policy, and how that is relating to our ability to positively contribute to taking action on climate change. And we will continue to update our response accordingly. Thank you so much for your time, everyone. And I look forward to speaking to you some more where there are questions, and I'll give the floor back to Janet. Thanks.
Thank you, Harshan, and congratulations to you and to Engineers and Geoscientists BC for your leadership in this area. The disruption and cost to Canada's economy when infrastructure is damaged or destroyed by extreme weather events is growing and becoming more frequent across Canada, with engineers having a significant role to play in addressing climate change issues. Our next question is for John Gamble. What is ACEC's position on climate change, and what are some of the barriers that you see, John, that are preventing us from coming together to address climate change? Over to you.
I was just living in fear of being the first one to forget to unmute. Thank you for the question, Jeanette. It's obviously, first of all, as I alluded to, I think engineers left to their own devices are very hardwired to find solutions to challenging problems, and a lot of the ways of dealing with environmental sustainability are, in fact, exercise and optimization, reducing waste, efficiency, looking at alternative options. And if we're given the opportunity to do that, I think most engineers and other professions for that matter would take up the challenge. But in terms of our position as a business association, we certainly acknowledge that there's no question, climate change is a real thing. And we've got to deal with it. We've got to recognize it, but it's not just enough to simply put that on someone else. I think we all have a role in a proactive approach. So to that regard, what we expect of consulting engineering firms, again, I think most of them are predisposed to this anyways, but we need always to consider the impact of the climate on our work and consider the impact of our work on the climate. And a good case of that is in good faith, there's a lot of infrastructure assets that were designed on the premise of the 50-year flood and the 100-year flood. And of course, as we know, the 100-year flood is no longer the 100-year flood. So that creates a challenge. And so it takes a little bit of more of a forward look as opposed to that comfort of looking back over our shoulder on historical data. As always, we have to balance social and economic and environmental factors in the context of the public need. And then we have to be, I think, probably stronger about informing clients where there is a more sustainable or less harmful alternative. We need to incorporate best practices into our designs and our plans whenever possible. And we need to also inform and train our employees in terms of current best practices and adjust our practice accordingly. Evaluating the risk of changing climate on engineering practices, striving to develop leading edge solutions which can reduce human-induced climate change through research, development of new technologies, and to seek us, and this is collectively, We need to seek trusted advisor roles with clients, governments, regulators, researchers, the general public, by speaking out from a position of knowledge and what is possible and what is being done both domestically and internationally. And engineers, we've done great things. We've been doing, well, certainly in the modern context here in Canada, we've been doing great things for 150 years. Engineers have been doing great things for over 2,000 years, possibly even longer. But we're not very good about telling our own story. So advocacy sometimes comes unnaturally to engineers. We tend to let our work stand. But if we don't tell our story, no one else is going to tell it for us. So anyways, I think assuming that most of the people that are tuned in with us today are engineers or work with engineers, I don't think there's anything here that's shocking or particularly surprising. But there are there's clearly some, what I'll call some cultural inertia that is perhaps tying one hand behind our back as we try to move forward. And for example, and I'm looking at this as a business association a little bit through a commercial lens, but some of the procurement methodologies, some of the contractual structures in which that define our relationship with our clients and other parties sometimes work against prudent public policy, and climate change, sustainability, resiliency certainly fall into that category, as do a lot of other social benefits from infrastructure, because whether we realize it or not, our works of engineering, this is what makes engineering such a wonderful profession, and why I think we believe so strongly what we do, is that because we have a very important consequential effect on people's well-being. But unfortunately, and I forgive those in the audience for some of the broad brush generalizations, because there are always exceptions, but more often than not, procurement of engineering services is a barrier to innovation. It's generally predicated on the basis of reducing cost instead of coming up with better solutions. Our contractual relationships tend to be more focused not on reducing risk, but pushing risk onto another party. Consequently, by design or not, you end up with an adversarial relationship. And this is an all hands on deck problem that we're facing with the climate change and resiliency. And we need to conduct our business in a way that the owners and their consultants and the contractors and the other professions for that matter, that our interests are all aligned. And we also need to be mindful, because often a consulting engineering firm, it has a contract with a client. It might be a public or private agency. It might be a level of government or agency. It might be a mining company. It might be a real estate developer. There's also but what we cannot lose sight of are the people that benefit from our work, benefit from our innovation. They may not be immediately in the front row as we go about our daily transactions. And similarly for the owners and the clients that we serve. We need to be mindful for those people that aren't in the room when we're doing our business together. So I think we need to sit down and have some adult discussions about how we procure engineering services, how we scope engineering services, and how we allocate risk and discuss risk, not to push risk onto someone else, not to reduce my risk, not to push my risk onto you, but to reduce the likelihood of, to reduce risk, to reduce the likelihood of consequence. That's where we need to align our efforts. And there are ways of doing that. But I really think that it really requires us to step back and ask why we're into this. And it's a paradigm. It's going to be a little bit of a paradigm shift. Now, we used to do this little years and years ago, when, I'm talking decades. But of course, when you have, most engineering works tend to be very capital intensive. And they end up being big budget lines, both for private corporations and for levels of government. So for decades, we saw a lot of pressure. Why are we spending so much for this? Can't we do this cheaper? All good questions. But is cheaper the objective here, or is better? I know for decades, we've been talking about a more holistic life cycle approach because it economically makes more sense. It provides more longevity to engineering projects. It increases that life cycle, and it actually, over the course of the life cycle, results in very significant savings. The capital savings, the operational savings that more than account for any possible increase in consulting fees. In fact, you'll find those savings probably are more than the consulting fees all totaled. But the challenge is that often the decisions are made on cash in, cash out basis, or we're looking at the next quarter instead of 20 years from now. And if we can't get that argument in the people's imagination based on the economics of it, how about climate change? How about resiliency? How about those water control systems, those water lines, the sewage systems that were designed based on good faith, based on design assumptions that are no longer relevant? We're going to have to do scenario planning now. We're going to have to do more speculation and modeling. If you want a good result, don't do it on the lowest price. We need the right outcome. That's not saying you have to spend the most. It's about getting the scope right. And that requires an adult discussion. So I think there's some opportunity. I think this awakening is going to create some opportunities, and it's going to have a multiple bottom line. So anyways, I'm really looking forward to where this can lead, but it is going to take some adult discussions, and it's going to take a willingness and some leadership to do things differently, both from our side of the table and from our client side of the table.
Great. Well, thank you so much, John. I'm looking forward to the beginning of those adult discussions during our Q&A. For now, let's talk about the path to becoming an engineer. There's a process to becoming an engineer, and one of the very first steps is getting an undergraduate degree. Our next question is for Louise Millette. What do you see as the role of engineers in addressing climate change, and how do academic institutions prepare future engineers to address climate change? Over to you, Louise.
Thank you. Well, Arshan mentioned it, engineers have the responsibility to protect the public in all their undertakings. So the first thing we must do is adapt our practice, and we heard about that, to account for the changing conditions resulting from global warming. Extreme weather events are more frequent, and all models agree that we will keep seeing more floods, drought, rising sea levels, active permafrost, tornadoes, all those things, and that these changes affect the very design criteria that we use. John was mentioning it. What was safe in the past is certainly not safe anymore and won't be in the future. This goes, of course, for all water-related infrastructures, such as drainage system, dams, water intake, shore protection, but also for roads, bridges, even communication systems. In fact, all our infrastructures and systems must be more robust now to face new conditions. We must also work with others to build more resilient societies. We will face growing difficulties with our global economies and with our supply chains. We must prepare for that. Universities have already modified their technical curricula to take into account the need to continuously adapt the design criteria in all disciplines. Some have also developed specific courses on the topic of climate change, such as the civil engineering course, Climate Change and Water Resource, or the chemical engineering course, Adaptation to Climate Change and Solution. These two are examples from Polytechnic, but I know that similar actions are taken by other universities. However, I think you probably all suspected that or hoped for, and that such changes were already made in the curricula. That brings me to my second point. By the way, there'll be 4 points. I strongly believe that engineers have a greater role to play in addressing climate change than preparing to face its challenges. They must try to stop it. This has to be part of their training, and it has to be part of our practice. Engineers must track down all possible sources of carbon that find their way into the atmosphere and work at reducing them. Doing so is a big task, and it requires that engineers continuously analyze the impact of their work on the environment and on society. I would call that developing an introspection capacity of our work. Now, specifically on education, and because not everybody might know that or remember it, I'd like to take a minute to talk about the accreditation of engineering programs in Canada. Engineers, as mentioned today a few times, engineering is a regulated profession, so it comes as no surprise that engineering education is also regulated in Canada. All programs must meet very high standards. Engineers Canada, the national association, has the mandate to regularly audit all programs in Canada against a set of very robust standards. I have been involved in my career in 3 rounds of Engineers Canada certification. Believe me, it is a serious and very thorough business. Takes about 2 years to prepare. The accreditation criteria cover a wide range of requirements. Some of them are easy to relate to engineering, such as technical knowledge or problem solving. Others relate to the broader work of engineer, such as professionalism, ethics and equity, and the impact of their work on environment and society. This is the very introspection capacity I told you that I believe all engineers should have. It is one of 12 attributes that programs must develop in their students, and that is a requirement. It is not a suggestion. Therefore, for education, my conclusion is that all engineering institutions in Canada should be aware of that they all are working on developing an understanding of their responsibility in students and providing them with the tools they will need to rise to this challenge. Now, back to global warming, I get to my third point. How can engineers actively strive to stop global warming? The first thing that generally comes to mind is innovation. Engineers are good at finding solutions to big problems. Surely they can come up with something this time. Well, yes, for sure, and no. Technology has certainly helped us becoming very efficient in using resources. However, it has to be continuously examined to prevent what we call the rebound effect. I'll give you an example. Think about all the gains we've made in fuel efficiency for vehicles in the past 20 years. What were these effects on global warming? Well, what happened is that as time passed, the cars just got bigger. They're 18% bigger now than they were in 2000. And people massively bought more cars and SUVs. The two facts completely canceled the gains that we had made from technology improvement. This is what we call the rebound effect, or the Jevons paradox, coined by William Stanley Jevons, an economist in 1865. So this is not a new concept, but most of the time it is completely overlooked. Improved efficiency generally leads to more consumption. Nevertheless, innovation also opens new solutions. For example, electrified vehicle. When fueled with green electricity, and only then, they do reduce greenhouse gases if you keep them from long enough. For example, brand new electric vehicles have a bigger impact than fuel powered one because they require more materials in their construction. For example, in Quebec, where the electricity is almost 100% green, it takes about 85,000 kilometers before an electric car becomes cleaner than a fuel powered one. Their advantage are in their use, not in their production. Therefore, we have to keep encouraging innovation for sure, but also to take into account all the carbon that hides in the materials and the processes for these innovations. All the resources we use come from somewhere, and extraction has a cost. Using less, repairing more, and recycling most should be always part of the design criteria. Global warming is a consequence of a development based on burning fuel while choosing to ignore two important facts that science have been telling us for a long time. There are effects of that increase of CO2 in the atmosphere, and fossil fuels are a finite resource. For both reasons, this cannot go on forever. It is just not sustainable. And that brings me to my fourth and final point. At Polytechnic, as in many universities, we have adopted sustainability as a core value and decided to move our curriculum towards sustainable engineering. This goes beyond responding to climate change, but it is essential if we want to stop it. Books have been written on the subject. Sustainable engineering now even has its own entry in Wikipedia. It says that engineering activities must use energy and resources at the rate that does not compromise the natural environment or the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Well, I can't help but mentioning that in the case of a finite resource, there is no such a rate. We cannot use fossil fuels in a way that there will be some left for future generations. This is not time, it is just not possible. Achieving sustainability, the lasting balance between environment, society, and economy is a wicked problem. There is no unique solution and there's no silver bullet. The priorities are always conflicting with each other, but do we have the choice? Sustainable engineering requires thinking of the impact of our work from the very beginning, not as an afterthought. Thinking in the long term. Considering the projects from cradle to grave in a life cycle approach, but also reaching out to others, not only experts of different disciplines, but also to stakeholders of the project. It calls for proactive communication and dialogue. We engineers, we cannot do that alone. I'm convinced that to properly respond to climate change, engineers must shape a more sustainable future. Very few of us will be doing everything right. But if more of us do everything a little bit better and look at the big picture, we will certainly move in the right direction. So back to you, Janet.
Merci, Louise. For our next question, let's all continue to look both inside and outside of Canada's borders. Let's take a global perspective. Climate change disproportionately affects the world's poorest and most vulnerable communities. We see this within Canada and around the world. This question is for Boris. As a nonprofit organization that engages engineers to build a better world through engineering projects that empower communities to meet their basic human needs, how is your organization addressing climate change, and what are we doing, and are we doing enough as a profession? Over to you, Boris.
Thanks, Jeanette. So I introduced myself professionally. I just wanted to acknowledge I'm also the father of 3 young kids, and they're concerned about climate change. My son is 11 years old. He's asking questions. My daughter Annika is 9, and she's also asking questions about climate change, and they're anxious about it. But also I've noticed that they feel kind of disempowered. You know, it's like climate change is big and scary, and somebody out there needs to do something about it. Someone powerful needs to do something about it. It's often that we tend to abstract. You know, we talked about the role of engineers. Who exactly are we talking about? So one of the points I'm going to make is that we're talking about ourselves, and it's important to recognize the role that individually we need to play, the responsibility we have to act. I think there's also a tendency when we think about such a complex and scary issue as climate change to turn inward, to say, how is climate change going to impact us, the Canadian economy, our country, the resilience of our infrastructure, the infrastructure gap in this country. But it's often as if we could be an island in the world, you know, isolated from the rest. And if we're okay, then that's fine. And Jeanette, you're pointing to the fact that this is global, that we need to think differently about climate change. We need to think about it differently from something that somebody out there needs to do something about to like, we have a responsibility to act. And for something that's threatening Canada as a country, to a place of global solidarity and shared purpose, and the fact that our futures are bound together. So I have two propositions for the panel. The first one is that each of us have a responsibility to think about our Canadian national situation as interconnected and interdependent with the rest of the world. The other one is that we have an opportunity to treat our national efforts in addressing climate change as an integral part of a global collective effort to address this threat. So what do I mean by responsibility? Why do we have a responsibility to think beyond our own borders? Well, so extreme weather events are increasing everywhere in the world, not just in Canada. And the latest IPCC report points very clearly to the fact that delay means death. And it means death for a lot of people who are much more vulnerable than Canadians around the world, for whom small variations in rainfall means hunger, quite literally. And I'm not saying that for being dramatic about it. It's just simply a fact, and I still recall the floods in Calgary. It was a shocking event to have the whole city really flooded, the whole the area of the stampede, like being underwater. I still remember those photos. There were like 4 deaths in the province from that event. And if you think about the hurricane that just happened in Madagascar, which by the way no one heard about on the news, the casualties are much more important. And from a moral standpoint, if every life has equal value, then I think it's really important to think about mitigation of climate change as a global issue. To me, there's another part of why we have a responsibility to act, which is that ultimately Canada is a large emitter of CO2 on a per person basis. I looked it up, and we emit 14,410 kilograms of CO2 per person per year in 2020. As a comparison, Madagascar emits 150 kilograms of CO2 per person per year. Or Kenya, a place where Engineers Without Borders works, is 310 kilos. And so I realized that if Canada reduced its emissions by half, we would still be emitting about 7,000 kilos per person per year. If Kenya at the same time doubled its own, it would be 600 kilos. We would still be doing 10 times more CO2 emissions than Kenyans on a per capita basis. And there's 50 million of them. It's not like they're fewer than us. So we could still multiply by 2 the Kenyan and divide by 2 in Canada, and would still be on an unequal footing from an emission standpoint. And climate change is that horrendous issue that the worst polluters are less hurt than the most vulnerable, who are actually not emitters in the planet, and that's fundamentally unjust. And John mentioned about this the voice of engineers and the advocacy that we need to actually bring up. And there's a question in the Q&A about I'm looking for a job in climate change and environmental sustainability. Where do I find that? Well, I think if Canada was really taking climate change seriously, there would be more job opportunities. If we were funding, climate resilient infrastructure in this country and actually close the financing gap, there would be more jobs in Canada. But I would also say there's a report from the Overseas Development Institute that showed that Canada, on a fair share basis of climate finance, which the global community committed to 100 billion per year, for the developing world to be able to adapt to climate change and for mitigation initiatives, well, Canada is only meeting 20% of its fair share, which means that it takes us 5 years to give what we should be giving in 1 year. So I think my message to EWB members every year at our national conference, and my message to you here, is that as an engineer, you have a voice. You understand the implications of climate change on people's lives in a very tangible way. And you have a voice, and I would say you have a responsibility to use it. It's not somebody else out there that's going to do it. It's all of us who are going to rise to the occasion and hold our governments accountable to actually doing the right thing and funding things appropriately. And then the second aspect is we have an opportunity to do things differently. And this were, Jeanette, your question about, what is, EWB doing? When I read about, Canada, some assessments about Canada's need to face climate change, there's a report from Canning Front Challenge that was done by BCG Center for Canada's Future, they point to a few things that Canada needs. Canada needs talent, and we need innovation. And what talent, it means like engineers who understand the challenges both as local and global and interconnected, who are effective at working on complex socio-technical challenges, who are fluent in cross-cultural communication, engineers that are able to integrate community needs, financing needs, multidimensional sovereignty concerns, because that's a domestic question in Canada, and long-term views on the impact of all project designs. So those are competencies that sometimes you don't learn in the classroom, and EWB is an organization that offers young students a way to actually expand their horizon and practice that on a day-to-day. The other one on innovation is that, thinking outside the box and looking for breakthrough innovations is really important. And the report also, points to the fact that Canada struggles with isolated and disconnected rural communities. Income inequality is an issue where not everyone is fully included in the benefits of Canadian society. Clean water for all Canadians is a problem with climate change. Fewer neighborhoods with poor public transits is also an important thing to work on. And those are challenges that are faced in so many parts of the world. And so as we tackle these challenges in rural Canada, we are also able to share resources and share ideas, and frankly, learn from ideas that come from the rest of the world in that. And so I'll leave you with one small example of an initiative that EWB Canada is doing. So we, 5 years ago, started supporting a Kwangu Kwako Limited. It's a startup in Nairobi that helps people who have just migrated into the city and live in slums to access better living standards and a more resilient a place of living, because they live in sort of like shacks that are made of a corrugated roof, steel roof, and just like 4 stilts. And I've walked through some of these areas. It's pretty unsanitary and very unsafe. And so the Kwangu Kwako Limited has created a sort of a prefabricated 10 by 10 concrete panel Lego-like structure that is very affordable and basically replaces these shacks and allows people to afford decent housing. And so we provided them with a little bit of funding at the beginning for their R&D and to basically buy down the risk. And we mobilized about a dozen volunteers, and we had some of our chapters provide support on design. And so it's happening internationally, right? Like those are chapters in Canada that are taking on a design challenge, putting their heads into, trying to help this startup gain the skills and sort of like sort out their engineering challenges. And 5 years later, while Kwangu Kwako is now a sustainable and growing initiative, they're building 50, 100 houses every year. Their book of projects is doubling every year. They're building schools, they're building housing units, they're shop fronts for low-income families. And they were able to repay even the risk capital that EWB Canada provided them in the first place, which then allows us to recycle that resource and make our donors' funds go further. So there are ways to be innovative. There are ways to make exponential change happen. And it's not necessarily just the engineering that matters. I find that innovation is a holistic thing. It has to be innovation on the financing structure, has to be innovation on the business model, and on the design, the actual engineering design. So, I hope I presented EWB as a platform where your voice can be expressed, where your time and skills can be provided, and where your financial support can make a big difference. And I know it was a little long, so thank you, Jeanette, for your patience.
Thank you, Boris. Boris, you mentioned that we all need to use our voices and also to encourage others to use theirs. Our next question is for someone who's doing exactly that. Shanley McEwen, President of the Canadian Federation of Engineering Students, an organization that represents the 85,000 engineering students that are currently pursuing engineering studies across Canada. Shanley, our question for you is, what are your thoughts on how equipped students feel to take on the challenges and opportunities of climate change? Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeanette. So when we talk about sort of the challenges of climate change and if students are equipped to handle them, I think it's important to first recognize that the challenges faced by students in the profession are really dependent on what you're studying. So I'm in environmental engineering, and the way that climate change will affect my future and the jobs available to me is is quite obvious, but it's not necessarily as obvious for someone, let's say in software engineering. However, and I think what's really important here is that we all do have a part to play in this discussion. You know, it's not just the environmental engineer's job or the sustainable engineer's job. It's all of our responsibility to sort of take on this beast of a problem. In the last decade, or you could even say the last 5 years, we've experienced this like social and ecological awakening of our communities. And especially, I think we're seeing that in young people. You know, every year I see more and more people that really fully understand the gravity of what's going on right now. And the truth is that it can be really scary and it can be really overwhelming, especially as a young person. You know, eco-anxiety is something that affects most of my peers, myself included. And it can be, as Boris has said, it can be really easy to start to feel helpless when we begin to think about it as like one of us versus this massive, you know, wicked problem. Just a few weeks ago, actually, I had the opportunity to visit some of my family. And I have this young cousin, she's 6 years old, and you know, we were playing, and she asked me if, very sincerely, you know, she's like, Shanley, do you know about climate change? And of course, you know, I said, yes, I do. And she said, okay, well, you know, my dad said that you're going to help fix it when you're older. Is that true? And of course I said, you know, yes, that's what I hope to do. And she was like, is there a lot of people helping? And, you know, this was very sweet, of course, because, you know, she's 6 years old, but the reality is that, you know, when I was 6 years old, I don't think I even knew what climate change was. And the reality is too, that the people in our communities are looking to us as a profession to help fix this problem. And there are very tangible ways we can do this. And when we talk about the student experience, I don't actually think it starts with technical knowledge for us. Like Louise talked about, we're in accredited programs for a reason, and it's to ensure that we have the technical knowledge to take on these problems. I know I have incredible professors at the University of Saskatchewan who, you know, have done a lot in my courses to impress on me and on my peers, sort of the weight and the responsibility we have in facing these challenges, while also being honest about the fact that we are going to be using the technical tools that they have taught us in very different ways than they've ever had to. To give, I guess, a bit of a story here, recently I got a midterm back. I'm taking this land reclamation course. And there was one question in there, basically the prof posed a land reclamation and erosion problem. And he's like, how do you fix this? And you know, you write, you know, do this, or, you know, we'll put up some silt fencing, we'll do whatever. And we're going over the exam in class. And there was part of the question he gave everyone a 0 on, and he goes, well, you know, now we never explicitly discussed, you know, post-reclamation observations as it relates to a problem like this. And he goes, but the reality is that this could be your job in a few months, and there's going to be a lot of specific decisions that we don't get to talk about before then. And, you know, when he said that for a second, I was like, is this fair? You know, I was frustrated. I was like, well, if we didn't talk about it, how am I supposed to know it? You know, and I sat with that for a minute, and I sat with that for a while, and I realized it really wasn't unfair. You know, in that moment, my professor chose to share a kind of harsh reality with us. And that's that we won't know all the answers by the end of our education, and that, you know, technical knowledge isn't going to fix everything. We're going to be applying and developing our engineering judgment in very different ways than professionals used to, or even professionals today do. So I guess if it doesn't start with technical knowledge, if the issue of technical knowledge isn't a problem, then, you know, what does it start with? What's the issue? And I think the very simple answer that us at the CFES has come to learn is that it starts with caring about people. You know, aside from being future engineers, we are all first and foremost members of unique and beautiful communities that we're going to be able to serve one day. And when we decide to care about these communities, we simultaneously decide to do what we can to help them. And that translates into our professional work. You know, an attitude of apathy isn't just going to hurt me in my professional life. It's going to take away from my professional ability to solve these problems. We're not, you know, as engineers, we're not cogs in a wheel. We're teammates, and we're leaders, and we're problem solvers. And when we choose to care about each other, we even get to become innovators. What's missing in our engineering education, it's not technical knowledge on how to handle the challenges of climate change. We have those tools. I think what's missing is a sense of compassion and empathy for those communities that we're actually building for, the ones we directly build for and the ones that are affected in the different ways. The engineering education, I think, is very often, it's far removed from the people that it serves. And I would say that in the majority of my courses, and I think this is universal, I haven't been taught to think about the way my design affects people. I've been taught a lot about what's efficient. I've been taught a lot about what's profitable and what's effective, but not necessarily the person. And I think that's really what's missing. We've become so caught up in, having the correct technical knowledge and the correct systems that we've forgotten the reason that we're doing all of this anyways. In my future, if I'm an engineer one day, hopefully one day soon, and I'm designing, a stabilization for a riverbank, it may not matter it may not matter if I use a retaining wall or live fascines or a gabion rock wall, if I'm just caring about if it's efficient, if it works, and if it's cost effective. But, if I'm designing for a community, if I'm designing for a little kid, like my cousin who wants to experience the world with their family, it matters in a bit of a different way. And whether you're a student or a professional, I think we can choose to be engaged in our communities right now. We can choose to care about people, and we can choose to care about these communities, however that looks for us, because it's going to look different. My communities that I choose to be a part of are different than the people around me, but they're all worth caring about. So I think when we ask the question about, are students equipped? I think what it really comes down to is, are students ready to care about each other? And I think if we're ready to do that, we are ready to take this on. So, if I had to give you like a yes or no answer on if students are equipped to handle climate change, I think I'd have to say yes, because I do think students are ready to care. Thank you so much, Jeanette.
Thank you so much, Shanley. I love that concept of being ready to care. And I'd like to thank all of the panelists very much for sharing their wisdom, for sharing their thoughts. I can tell that everyone on this panel is ready to care. And I'm thinking that this is a great opportunity for us to move over to our Q&A. We've gotten lots of great questions put into our Q&A. And I'm going to start with the question that Boris referenced, which is from someone who recently received his EIT and is now looking for a job about climate change, but doesn't know how and when to start. This EIT is asking, can any of the panelists briefly explain the process of looking for a job that connects to climate change, where to start and how? So is there anyone that would like to start with a response?
I can have a go at it.
Thanks, Louise.
When I graduated with a PhD in drinking water, this was not what I wanted to do. I chose engineering. I changed 3 times university when I was an undergrad. So I did my searching at a tender age. But when I finished my PhD, I knew for sure that what I wanted to do was to make a difference for the protection of the environment. We didn't talk much about sustainability back in those years. That was a while ago. So I decided that I was going to find somewhere that needed my my expertise, whether they needed it or they knew it or recognized it or not. So I was hired by, it took me 3 months to get a big company to hire me because they really didn't see the need to get somebody with a PhD that had no expertise in their field. But I'm glad to say that after interviewing me, they waited 3 months and they couldn't find somebody to fill the job. So I didn't know if I impressed them or I discouraged them. But anyway, the reality was that they accepted my terms and I started working with them. So my decision was to make the change from the inside. I was willing. I didn't wait for a job description that says, I want somebody that will put us on the right track in respecting our obligation to protect the environment. It said, we think we should be able to wiggle out of those obligations. Can you help? And I told them from the beginning that I would not be their window dressing, that I would understand their operational imperatives, respect their budget, but if I felt that things weren't going anywhere, I would go elsewhere. And they were okay with that. I was young and a little bit naive when I spoke to them, but it worked. And they first said to me, oh, you'll probably be out of there by 2 years. You'll have solved all our problems. We don't have a lot of problems anyway. We're not a company that's dirty. And after 12 years with a group of 30 people, when I left, there was still a lot to do. So my advice for you would be, keep your eyes open for jobs that don't say climate change. It can say reducing our risk, reducing our costs, understanding better our liabilities. So all these, they require working on reducing climate change and understanding climate change. So unfortunately, it's not an easy answer. It's just you have to be bold enough to get in there. And once you're in there, make yourself indispensable. I hope this helps.
Thank you so much, Louise. I'm going to go to our next question, which is a question for all of the panelists. And the question is, if you had to summarize the thoughts that you just shared in our session into a bumper sticker or a tattoo or a social media post, what would it say?
I'll give this a shot. And again, looking through my lens as, representing the business of engineering, is that if we're going to solve this and all the other problems we're facing, if we're going to do this right, we need to treat engineering as an investment, not as an investment to be leveraged, not as an expense to be reduced or minimized. And while my microphone's open, can I just pick up on something that Shanley said? Mm-hmm. She just nailed it. I'm not talking about the definition in law of what a profession is, but philosophically, it's engineering sits at that nexus between societal needs and the world of science and technology. And for too many years, somewhere we got obsessed with the science and technology, which is important, but it's really that nexus where they meet and intersect that really is the raison d'etre of engineering. And it's also very hard to define in code, which justifies it. The extraordinary exclusive right to practice is with that societal risk, that societal investment. And she said it very eloquently. And I just want to, for someone so young, though she does have vinyl on her wall, I see there, but very good. That was very profound.
Thank you, John. So I guess it's over to you, Shanley, for your bumper sticker, your tattoo, or your social media post.
Thank you so much, John. And yes, I do have vinyls on my wall, but they may be misleading about my age. I believe these are from my father. So
she didn't say grandfather. We're lucky.
If I had to, I actually have this sign hanging up in my kitchen. And I think if I had to, reduce all of this to, a fun catchphrase for Instagram, it would probably be, your work is your power. Each day, as you're an engineer, you get to make choices to do something powerful in your communities and do something powerful in whatever your projects are at the time. So I think that's what it would have to be for me.
Thank you, Shanley. And do we have another of our panelists who'd like to share theirs?
Sure, I can take a stab at it. I guess what we are saying is that, we all have common but differentiated responsibilities through the work that we do, right? And we do understand that every choice matters, right? Every year matters, and every positive action matters. If I may take a quick digression, in my role, I felt a little bit small, thinking about, what am I as an individual engineer going to be able to accomplish? But what we've come to realize that if we connect together and if we understand each other's strengths and weaknesses and explore partnerships and collaboration, there is no limit to what we can collectively achieve. And that's a big thing to put on a bumper sticker. So I will just note that every positive action matters, folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Harshan. And Boris and Louise, any bumper stickers, tattoos, or social media posts from the two of you?
I would say something like, so it's never been done before. So what? I mean, this is something I've heard so many times. Oh, you can't do that. It's never been done before. But there has to be a first.
Perfect, Louise. Merci, and thank you. And Boris.
Shanley kind of stole it from me. I had, you have more power than you think.
Oh, that's a great one. And that's a great way for us to wrap up our session for today, Boris. It's hard to believe that we're at our wrap-up time, and I'd like to start by giving a big thanks to our panelists, Harshan from Engineers and Geoscientists British Columbia, John Gamble from ACEC Canada, Shan Lee from the CFES, Boris from Engineers Without Borders Canada, and Louise Millette of Polytechnique Montréal. And also a big thanks to Senator Rosa Galvez for joining us today. All of your thoughts were greatly appreciated. As we wrap up a great discussion, here are a few thoughts and calls to action. First, as everyone on the panel has mentioned, and as Senator Rosa Galvez mentioned also, as a profession, we need to acknowledge that the work of engineers significantly influences, both positively and negatively, our human contribution to climate change, and that our ability to influence isn't limited to engineers working directly in the field of sustainability. Engineering professionals from all backgrounds and sectors have the unique combination of technical and interpersonal skills that can be used to contribute to climate change solutions in Canada and all around the world. Second, how can we influence our clients, suppliers, colleagues, peers, and others to make choices that work towards a more sustainable future? We hope that this discussion today has inspired some thoughts that can lead you to have those discussions. And then third, to support you in this exploration, I'd like to encourage you all to take our Sustainability in Practice massive open online course, also known as our Sustainability in Practice MOOC. The course is a collaboration between Engineers Canada and Polytechnique Montréal, and it provides you with real-life case studies illustrating practical applications of the 10 guidelines contained in Engineers Canada's National Guideline on Sustainable Development and Environmental Stewardship for Professional Engineers. The course also suggests tools to apply these guidelines in your professional practice. The next session starts on March 16th, and a link is available in the Q&A, and it will also be sent to you after the session. I'd also like to encourage you to check out the Public Infrastructure Engineering Vulnerability Committee program, or PIVC program. You may have heard this acronym before. That was developed by Engineers Canada with support and collaboration from the federal government, and is now being administered by the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, also known as the ICLR. In addition, Engineers Canada developed the Infrastructure Resilience Professional Program, which is now being led by the Climate Risk Institute. Links to more information about their courses and their certification program are in the Q&A and will also be shared in our follow-up email. So we thank all of you for participating in our session today. And once again, a happy World Engineering Day to everyone. Thanks everyone, and take care. Bye.